Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. We've kind of reached sort of the end of the NFL draft declaration line here. Deadline looms, so we're kind of getting a picture of who will and won't be back for Georgia in 2025, and as you would maybe expect, sort of a mixed bag of results. We'll talk about some of that, but why the overall mood should still be optimistic when it comes to Georgia for the upcoming season. Speaking of optimism, we've got some tonight as Georgia goes on the road at Tennessee, one of the bigger basketball games we can remember Georgia playing in really quite some time. Tough task, of course. We'll talk about why that is a little bit over the course of our time together here, too. A former Dawg, we now know where he'll play next year. We'll address that, plus two great guests. Mike Griffith stops by. We'll talk more about, kind of the Etienne conversation that we got into with him last week. And, of course, Davin Bellamy here today, too, to share some insight on all the comings and goings with Georgia. So lock in. We'll try to make good use of your time. We're glad you've shared some of it with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Kind of got a flurry of news around Georgia over the last 24 hours or so. Some of it, I would say, good news. Some of it, I would say, bad news. Now, let me be honest here for a moment. I don't like calling it bad news because if a guy chooses to go on to the NFL draft and try to make himself some professional money, genuinely, I am happy for that guy, and he should do what's right for him. But also, I'm a human being. Human beings are flawed. We live in a fallen world, and therefore I can't help sometimes but sort of see this through the selfish lens, the personal perspective of I always like it when players who've been productive for Georgia choose to stay at Georgia. So can we kind of understand that? That if I call something bad news, I'm not mad at the guy for making the decision. And it's not necessarily all that fatalistic. It's just a descriptor here of, hey, you got some stuff I think you ought to be really happy about, and you've got some news that I think has caused some Georgia fans to have some concern and, frankly, some curious questions here, too. We'll talk more about some of that with Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment. But me kind of lay this out for you. And some of you are listening while you're driving or while you're working out or something like that. Your mind has a tendency to wander, which I totally understand. I would love for you to hang on my every word, but every now and then you get busy, you're doing something else. So if you lose your train of thought while I'm speaking, or if something about what I say later on ends up not being clear, let me give you the last page first here for a moment, which is I believe that Georgia fans, through all of the stuff we've heard recently, whether it be the somewhat surprising news of Carson Beck, the not quite so surprising news of some of this other stuff, that the end result of all of this is Georgia fans have justifiable reason for generous helpings of optimism for 2025. And Georgia, thankfully, as a program, isn't hanging on any one decision of, well, this is the thing that's going to determine if we're good next year or not. Thankfully, that's not the kind of world in which Georgia lives in, and all of us who enjoy rooting for UGA ought to take some time to appreciate that. So let me start with what is undeniably good news, and then we'll get into what is at least the kind of thing that's going to give you a little bit of pause. Let me start with Oscar Delp coming back. Now, Delp is one of those guys that kind of flew a little bit below the radar for Georgia here this past season. And his decision now to kind of run it back for Georgia in 2025, I don't know that people necessarily realize how big of a deal this has a chance to be for Georgia, because the truth is that Delp wasn't a gigantic part of the offense here this season. He only had 248 receiving yards. I believe that, y'all check my math on this, I think that was sixth best for Georgia here this year. So not a huge year receiving for Delp, and probably not the year that everybody was sort of hoping he would have, or in some cases even projecting that he would have. Do y'all remember before the year began when there were those, and listen, we love this kind of thing. We do this ourselves. We sort of devour the other content when other content creators produce this stuff too. We like the idea of breakout seasons, who's going to break out and who's going to make a big name for themselves. And Oscar Delp stepping in a year after Brock Bowers' departure sort of felt like a really good candidate for the kind of breakout season at Georgia. And given the stats that I, shared with you a moment ago, you might say, okay, well, that breakout didn't quite fully happen. Maybe that didn't come to true fruition for Delp here this year. But the spirit of that prediction for Delp prior to the 2024 season, we think lives on for him in 2025. And Delp coming back, we think, has a chance to be a real big deal. In fact, let me give you a couple of numbers here. That Delp caught 4 touchdowns in Georgia's final 3 regular season games. That he seemed to become a bigger part of the offense as the season went along. And of the 21 catches that he had in total for the year, 5 of those catches came in the 2 postseason games that Georgia played, the SEC Championship and the College Football Playoff quarterfinal in the Sugar Bowl. So as the year went on, Delp was playing a better brand of football for the Dogs down the stretch. And for what it's worth, I had a chance to catch up with Oscar. If you'll remember, prior to the Sugar Bowl, we had our big media day broadcast where I just sort of walked around and microphone in hand like a crazy person, just interviewing anybody who I could sort of pin down long enough to do so. One of the guys who was kind enough to spend time with us that day was Oscar Delp. And I asked him about what I just mentioned, the fact that he was playing so much better, at least to my eyes anyway, so much better at the end of the year. Kind of the tight end room in general may be saying that too. So much better at the end of the year than they were perhaps at the beginning. And listening to Delp talk about that topic, I think ought to make you really excited about the fact that he has now announced he's coming back for 2025. This is what Oscar Delp said.
First of all, it certainly seems like, and maybe your perspective is different, it seems like you've been playing excellent football sort of in the right time here during this stretch run of the year. 2 big catches, of course, in that overtime period against Texas. How have you kind of seen your season progress? And I guess how good does it feel to sort of see you and your tight end position group seemingly really kind of clicking what it looks to me like at the exact right time?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had good guys in that room, and we've always had a really good room, and stuff at the beginning of the year might not have gone the way it seemed for the fans and everyone, or not all the catches we wanted, but we practice hard every day, and you do it at practice, it comes to you in the game. So I think just making one play after another and just building that confidence and trust with your quarterback and coordinator, it's a lot. But I mean, we're out there doing things where people don't really notice just what we do, just because how versatile of a position we play.
I like Oscar Delp a lot, and I like his answer right there. And if you haven't seen the whole thing, if you want to go to the DawgNation YouTube page, we actually have just that interview isolated. And one of the things we get into with Oscar, too, is the fact that he lives with Gunnar Stockton. And so for a guy that was already playing really good football at the end of last season, you have reason to believe there could be even better football on the horizon for him, because truly, authentically, he could have a unique connection with Stockton because he'll be catching passes from his college roommate here. They seem to have a special bond. And so when you start to think about what the Georgia offense could be for the upcoming season, and if you want to let your mind wander a little bit with certain kind of optimistic visions, Delp coming back, making good on what an outlet like Pro Football Focus once said was, kind of a breakout type player, continuing the great tradition for Georgia at the tight end position. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that could very much be true for Oscar Delp in 2025. His return for Georgia, foregoing the NFL draft, I think is a really big deal, perhaps bigger than it was initially kind of given credit for being when that announcement first came out yesterday. So if that's your good news, Georgia also got some not quite so good news yesterday. Once again, we're not going to be fatalistic about this, and we're certainly not mad at the guy for making the decision. But we got some not quite so good news yesterday when Trevor Etienne rolled on to the NFL. There'd been, I guess, some speculation that he might stay. We'll talk to Mike Griffith about that more coming up in a moment, but ultimately Etienne makes the choice to go to the NFL draft. And clearly, once again, selfishly, you would love to have a guy like Etienne back at Georgia for this upcoming season. That he's just a good player. He was, absolutely a killer against Texas, right? In Austin, SEC championship. This guy was the Longhorn Strangler in a lot of ways, just really took him down twice. So that'll be kind of, in a brief Georgia career, sort of what he's remembered for. Whether or not that makes him a DGD or not, I'll let y'all debate that in the comment section. But in all seriousness, he was really good in those 2 games. Although, ultimately the last moment for him kind of in a Georgia uniform will end up being the disappointing fumble that made things tougher for Georgia against Notre Dame. Either way, it's a good football player. It's a guy you would like to have had back here for 2025, choosing not to return and seemingly leaving Georgia without a lot of running back depth. That's where the concern kind of creeps in when Trevor Etienne makes the decision that he makes. And I do get some of that, and I don't want to be accused of glossing over any of that too much, but I don't know that I'm quite as anxious about some of this as perhaps some of you might be. I mean, on the one hand, the decision of Etienne, somewhat understandable, and the fact that, as one of our commenters said on video before our show began, hey, running backs have a little bit of a short shelf life. You sometimes just got to go move on. And at Georgia, I think you've always going to kind of be ready to make peace with all of that. But the other thing here is Etienne's departure, I think, makes it clear that the guy for Georgia next season is going to be Nate Frazier. And while you've kind of come used to Georgia having at least a duo of running backs, if not an entire stable of running backs, the truth is we have a little bit of a template for what Frazier might be next year. In 2019 for Georgia, not a great year for the offense, admittedly, but it was a really good year individually for DeAndre Swift. He was sort of that lead dog, so to speak, the one time in which Georgia obviously had the one main lead rusher as opposed to the tandem or the stable of running backs. That was the kind of template for what Frazier might be this year with what DeAndre Swift was back in 2019. And as we've said in the past, when you look at kind of other Georgia running backs who've had great success and gone on to big-time NFL draft futures and been a part of some really good Georgia teams, like Sony Michel, like DeAndre Swift, not quite so much Nick Chubb, because Chubb had monstrous numbers in his freshman season, but someone like Michel or Swift, guys who will be remembered as among the best running backs in the Kirby Smart era. When you look at where Frazier started as a freshman, it is well within reach that Frazier could eventually be what a DeAndre Swift was, what a Sony Michel was, a James Cook who goes on in the second round. What a guy like that was for sure. That Nate Frazier could be on his way to building that kind of career. We also had a chance to catch up with him back in New Orleans prior to the Sugar Bowl, and really our first conversation with Nate, who's obviously just a freshman. Freshmen don't typically speak to the media, but in talking to Nate, I found him to be a pretty thoughtful young man and the kind of guy that you do think could certainly have big things in store for him in 2025. First of all, as we just said, won't be playing with Trevor Etienne next season, but he did get a chance to learn from Etienne this past year. We got a chance to ask Frazier what he had learned from Trevor.
Having Trevor in our room has been great, man. He's been in the SEC for quite years. I consider him a vet. So just learning the details from him, being in the team meeting rooms, being in our unit rooms, our running back meetings and stuff like that as well. Just have him by my side on and off the field, telling me things I need to get better at and telling me things I need to fix. Just having him and using his knowledge and stuff like that has been great. It's been great for me. It's been great to use and utilize in my game and stuff like that. So I appreciate Trevor for that. Man, Trevor's a great leader, a great player, and a great person all around, just not on the field and off the field as well.
Certainly very complimentary of Etienne, but also interesting to hear him say, hey, Trevor was also helping me with the things that I need to learn and the things at which I've got to get better. And so we also, in the midst of that conversation, had a chance to ask Nate Frazier, what have you learned about being a running back this year, and kind of what is your new appreciation for that position now that you're playing at the highest level of college football? And once again, I thought Nate Frazier gave a very thoughtful answer.
Something I learned about being a running back is just a lot more to it than just getting the ball and going and running. Like, it's more of a technique to being a running back. It's little details and small things that you need to know to try to be a better running back. It's just being a running back is quite hard. It's probably one of the hardest positions on the field to play, but yeah, that's what it is, sir.
I find that answer to be interesting because it kind of bumps into, I think, assumption that many of us have made that when we would go stretches without seeing a lot from Frazier on the field, I think some of the stuff that Nate was addressing there is what we presumed was the reason he wasn't playing more. We all saw, like, dynamic athleticism. That was apparent from the very first game of his college career. He played very well, we thought, against Clemson. But then at times after that, you'd go a little while without seeing him sometimes. And, you talk to people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. They were sort of confirming, well, hey, there's more to being a running back than just, how well you move with the ball in your hand, whether it be pass protection or, any of these ball security, any of these sort of other things. It's about being more than just a great athlete. You've got to be sort of a polished, true running back, and that's sort of what it sounds like Nate Frazier spent a year learning. And we may see the benefits of that gained knowledge from him with the way that he plays in 2025. That you're certainly not glad to no longer have Trevor Etienne as a part of the Georgia roster. You'd love to have had him back, but in his absence, we may see Nate Frazier be the best running back that Georgia's had in quite some time. That is entirely possible based on the flashes that he showed during his freshman year. And with all of this, let me sort of sum this up this way. Etienne leaving sort of eats into your depth, the running back position, which sort of brings about some of the angst that some Georgia fans, and I'm not making a lot of this, I understand where this comes from, some angst that Georgia fans have about the offense overall and kind of the uncertain nature of an offensive line that struggled, a brand new starting quarterback, hoping that some newcomers at receiver can lift the fortunes of that position. Like, I do get where all of this is coming from. I'm not saying that there aren't legitimate questions about the Georgia offense. There obviously are for next season. But as we talked about already on the show this week, even with that being understood, with those ideas kind of baked into the cake of what Georgia will be for the 2025 season, we're also seeing Georgia listed among the shortest of favorites to win next year's national championship. Fourth, tied for third best odds out there of anybody, as we've discussed here in the past. And so the takeaway here is, while nothing about next season can be guaranteed, nothing can be guaranteed. This is not a fragile program, and this is not a fragile team. And Georgia's chances at a national championship weren't crushed because Trevor Etienne went to the NFL draft, and they're not crushed because Carson Beck's playing for Miami, and they're not crushed because so-and-so is not going to get fired. Like Georgia's chances at winning a championship just don't hinge on any one guy or any one decision. Now, Georgia's chances at a championship, as I said before, are also not a guarantee. They started this past year at number one. They did not finish there. We understand that. But Georgia remains on the short list of teams that could do it in 2025. And there's an overall level of program strength that makes unanswered questions a little easier to endure. And uncertainty and, the things that go along with that a little easier to absorb. So keep that in mind here, that we'll go into a spring practice in a few weeks and then a preparation for the fall after that, kind of not knowing some of the specifics about what Georgia will be. But the general, more broad question of how good they will be, we have a pretty good sense of that no matter who the names are on the field, one way or another, Dogs are still likely to put a contender out on the field. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 The Ref. Had a great conversation this morning with my good friend Dave Johnston. There's a part of the 960 The Ref morning show. Of course, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. We're just glad to have you as a part of the program, however you get here. And so appreciative of our friends at Breda Pest Management who make the show possible for you there as well. Matt Breda, great dog fan, big sports fan in general. You see him around town at sporting events all the time. But when he's not doing that, when he's not supporting the Dogs, he and his team at Breda Pest Management hard at work for you. They've been in business since 1975. They got 125 employees. You see their trucks literally everywhere. And that track record for success, great heritage of success for that organization that really has spanned multiple generations, that track record of success has gotten them recognized as the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. How great is that news? How exciting is that to see for them? And gives you a chance to work with Breda Pest Management. Now, there's obviously a little bit of prestige with that to say, hey, I support a company that's on DawgNation Daily and taking care of the Georgia Bulldogs and doing all that kind of good stuff. And that's no small thing. I certainly understand that. But the big thing about working with Breda Pest Management is they're going to put more money back in your pocket for making the switch to them. Obviously, you've got termite protection for your home, but the company you're working with, maybe the cost has gone up. Maybe the quality of the service that you've gotten is going down. at Breda Pest Management, that's not going to be a problem. They'll give you great service, the service they've been famous for forever, but they'll give it to you at a price that'll put more money back in your pocket just for making the decision. So find them online. It's BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com for more on that. All right, two great guests for us. It's Davin Bellamy coming up in a moment. It's Mike Griffith here in a second. Prior to that, though, let us go around the doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And I'll tell you, I woke up this morning really pretty excited about the Georgia basketball game tonight against Tennessee. And here's one of those sort of weird things. I'm not going to try to be too abstract too long, but when you think back on like what we've just experienced with Georgia football the last couple of years, you know, obviously winning national championships is amazing. I'm so thankful that I've been alive and been able to see Georgia win these championships. I'm sure you feel the same way. But the thing that I really enjoy about Georgia football is not the championships. I mean, I'm glad they have them, and the fact they do have them probably makes it easier to get the thing that I really enjoy. But the thing that I really enjoy about Georgia football, the thing that makes it not just what I do for a living, but my favorite pastime, is the sort of week-to-week conversation that we're able to have about it. It's the big games, the individual moments where, you know, on a weekend in the fall, you just sort of wake up excited about Georgia playing whoever and what it's going to take to get the win and how it's going to unfold. There's just something that's really almost like addictive. I hate to use that word, but I can't think of a better word. There's something almost just addictive about the way in which a big game just sort of draws you in, and I love that. And I'm glad that Georgia wins championships because it makes for more big games. But it's ultimately the sort of week-to-week big games that I really enjoy more than anything else. And so when you think about Georgia basketball right now, I don't know how this March is going to go. I think this is a team that could probably, I mean, you know, right now, there's a very good chance that not only does Georgia make the field, y'all, they may be wearing home whites on the first day of the NCAA tournament. Like, this is a team that has a chance to really kind of be a major factor, you know, coming up in March. But ultimately, I don't know that that is as important for me, weirdly enough, as the fact that on a random Wednesday in January, I would otherwise be cold and dreaming of spring. Well, all of a sudden today, I'm kind of jazzed up and excited. I'm kind of ready for I'm just sort of ready for Georgia basketball tonight against Tennessee. Tough task for the Dogs, of course, but a big game to be enjoyed and a big game to be excited about. Georgia is somewhere around, like, say, 11, 12-point underdog here. So going on the road is going to have its challenges. And in addition to that, it's a little bit of a Tennessee team that's probably a little bit of a bad mood. They took a bad loss, you know, recently. There was also some frustration. Did you see Rick Barnes, the Tennessee coach, who was kind of all over one of his star players, Chaz Lanier? This got some attention. I wanted to play this for you here for a moment. I think there's many of you know what this is. Barnes sort of getting on his guy Lanier from kind of an NIL standpoint of he's not doing what he's paid to do. It's a very kind of volatile comment when it first came out. When you listen to it, you sort of realize it's somewhat said a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, but to sort of give you an idea of the atmosphere for Georgia in Knoxville, this is Rick Barnes from just this weekend. A little bit of tension around the Tennessee program, perhaps anyway. Here is Barnes talking about his guy, Chaz Lanier.
I took him out first play in the second half because he didn't shoot the ball. That play was designed for that shot. And I told him, I said, if you're not going to do what you're getting paid to do, you sit over here, because he is getting paid to do that.
So there you go. That's Rick Barnes saying, he's not doing what he's getting paid to do, so we're going to put him on the bench. Now, you also hear the laughter there on that, which we played you audio only, but you know, Barnes got a little bit of a smile on his face when he's sort of saying these things. But those sort of statements, kind of speak to the world we live in college athletics, but it also just sort of speaks to the intensity of life in the SEC here right now, where Georgia last week had a chance to be the team feeding off a home crowd and beating ranked opponents, knocking off Kentucky, then knocking off Oklahoma, and now they'll be on the other side of that. But I'm here to tell you, while I don't know if Georgia will win this game or not, I certainly expect Georgia to go up to Knoxville and expect to give it a fight. I mean, let me give you one thing to consider here. Think about Kentucky, Georgia getting that win last week against the Wildcats. The game just prior to Georgia for Kentucky was, a 106-100 win against Florida. That's a highly ranked team. Kentucky beat them in a high-scoring thriller. The game for Kentucky right after Georgia was a game they won like 95-90 against Mississippi State. Now, think about this now. You've got 2 games for Kentucky where they essentially score combined 200 points. Or at least they were involving games that had kind of a combined 200 points. But the job that Georgia did in between that for them defensively, I think that gives you every reason to believe that Georgia can be competitive at Tennessee here tonight. Obviously, the front court with Surreal and Asa Newell give you a chance to kind of control the glass. A lot of this kind of comes down to offensive rebounds. There may not be a more important stat in college basketball than keeping teams off the offensive glass. And that'll be one of the things that Georgia tries to do tonight up there in Knoxville. We'll wish them well and be thinking about them and obviously tuning in and watching them as they get ready to do that. Of course, Georgia, on the football side, no stranger when it comes to winning in Knoxville. We'll see if the basketball team can do that tonight as well. That is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And, of course, when it comes to being always the home team, as Georgia Farm Bureau is, that's not just supporting football. It's also supporting basketball like this, too. In fact, it's fun to be able to do a little Georgia basketball for Around the Doghouse, the Georgia Farm Bureau here today. And we'll remind you that when it comes to your insurance needs, especially for like auto insurance, something you have to have, so making a good choice about who you choose to work with is certainly a wise thing to do. If it were me, I'd want to choose to work with friendly folks, Georgians, people like me, living and working in communities just like mine. And that's the same choice that's available to you, too. You can reach out to Georgia Farm Bureau today. Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That website, once again, gfbinsurance.com. We've said it for a long time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. When you connect their agents, work with their claims adjusters, when you do these kind of things, you're going to find out just how true that is. They've taken care of our agricultural community here in the state for a long time, and they're providing that same level of service to you, too, whether you're a farmer or not. So reach out to our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau today. Glad to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. All right, we have got Davin Bellamy here coming up a little bit later on. We'll talk to him about all the news that's out there right now. But for now, more on the basketball game tonight against Tennessee, more on what went down with Trevor Etienne, as we mentioned earlier. Let's cover all of that ground and more with Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider. 2
big home wins for Georgia last week. Big-time change in venue for tonight up there in Thompson-Boling Arena. Place is a cavern, but it's a place that Tennessee has certainly won in plenty. Mike, what are you expecting tonight when Georgia goes and plays one of the more, high-profile basketball games the program has played in a good number of years? What are you expecting for tonight?
Yeah, well, you said it, BA. It is cavernous up there, 22,000. It'll be sold out. Tennessee was number 1 last week. They lost at Florida. Tennessee is a physical, more mature team. I really like all the pieces Georgia has. They play really well together. Asa Newell, he's an NBA player right now. He needs to put a little more meat on the bones, but you watch this guy play, so poised, so smooth. Mike White's done a great job. It's a tall order. However, I say that, BA, and last night you had 2 top 5 SEC teams lose at home. The Florida Gators, who had the longest home win court streak in the league at 16 games, got knocked off by a point against Missouri. And then number 21, Ole Miss, a team that Georgia lost at earlier this year, goes in and knocks off number 4, Alabama. So you never say never. The Dogs are going to have to shoot it better. They're not the best shooting team. The assist-turnover ratio isn't what you'd want it to be, but they play good defense. They're very good in the post, and they've got a court general in Silas Demery Jr. So there's a lot of pieces in place for Georgia, but a tall order this week, going to Thompson-Boling Arena against number 6 Tennessee. They've won 9 in a row there, and then coming home to play Auburn that may or may not have their best player, of course. That didn't seem to slow number 1 Auburn down too much last night. They beat Mississippi State at home by more than 20 points. Number 15, Mississippi State, was 14-2 going into that game.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned some of what Tennessee does well in its front court. That's obviously been a strength for Georgia here this year, too. And I think kind of an interesting test for UGA just to frankly see, how grown up are Surreal and Newell in a spot like this. And was it absent the young man off the bench, gave him some huge minutes. The other big off the bench was outstanding on Saturday, too. Let's see how grown up this Georgia front court is, because obviously, against Tennessee, that's what's going to matter. Certainly, it seems like Tennessee's going to try to limit possessions here, try to utilize the offensive glass. How much Georgia can do to prevent that going to go a long way towards determining, do they have a chance to kind of win this after that sort of final media timeout with the under 4.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the rebounding's big. Georgia does lead the SEC in rebounding defense. That said, if we look at the Arkansas game last week, Georgia knocking off 2 top 25 teams last week at home, Kentucky and Arkansas. Some of the Arkansas baskets in transition came off missed threes, BA. I mean, there's no two ways about it. These dogs have to get better from the three-point line. They have to shoot a higher percentage. They do have the pieces in place. They've got the right mindset. I love the way these guys play their roles. Not saying it can't happen. I mean, it can happen. Again, 2 top 5 teams in the league. The cool thing about this, or the uncool thing, depending on how you look at it, in basketball, it is more of a journey. And I guess college football is too. I mean, we want to look at Ohio State. They lost 2 of their 3 biggest games in the regular season, and, they're playing a second chance national championship game. Well, I guess basketball is like that, though. You can lose 2, 3, 4 games in a row and collect yourself. Right now, you've got 11 SEC teams projected to make the field of 68. That's amazing. I did an interview with Bruce Pearl. He said it wasn't so long ago the SEC was fighting to get 3 or 4, and now we're looking at 11, 10, and Georgia's one of them. So to your point, it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity for these guys to test themselves. It's an opportunity game. You want to steal 1 or 2 on the road. Big thing is take care of business at home. Georgia has done that really well. Tonight we're going to learn more about this team. This team will grow from the challenge, win or lose. It's going to help them to have played in a 22,000-seat sold-out arena against a legit top 5, Final 4 talented team.
So the news yesterday involving Georgia football, obviously one of the stories was Trevor Etienne declaring for the NFL draft. You and I talked about this last week. I think there's some fans last week that were trying to make sense of what was going on with Trevor Etienne. So let me kind of follow up on this after, our discussion last week. Now Etienne declares. What exactly went down with all of this?
Well, I've been talking to his agent. Obviously, I talked to the people at the Senior Bowl. Trevor didn't get an invite to the Senior Bowl because the Senior Bowl was told he was staying at Georgia. You don't see him in an East-West Shrine game yet either. They might try to get him into one of those games. But, this is a guy who had it in his mind that he wanted to graduate from Georgia and he wanted to win a championship. And that was pulling him back to Georgia. Now, I'm being told that some of the things that Etienne's evaluating is, hey, you've played 3 seasons. You're healthy right now. Let's face it, he got a little banged up this year. He had the shoulder and the ribs, and maybe it seesaws a little bit. I'm afraid to say anything these days, BA. I mean, the agent thinks he's staying 1 minute, and Kirby's thinking that, and they're telling the Senior Bowl Etienne's coming back, and then Trevor reevaluates it. Could it be the 2 Penn State running backs to say they're – does the order – to me, Trevor right now looks like a guy that's a day 2 pick. Maybe he sneaks into the 2nd round with a good combine, but more likely a 3rd round pick if you look at the depth of running backs. So it made all the sense in the world why he would come back and why the agent was saying that last week. So it was kind of a bolt out of the sky, like, where'd this come from? And you may have even seen Nate Frazier on Trevor's Instagram say, you told me you were staying another year. Sob. Georgia thought Etienne was back. So this is the world we're living in now with this NIL, the tug of war. USA Today breaking a story now. Supposedly Georgia offered Carson back and Alabama wanted him to. There's so many moving pieces and it's so hard. And of course, I want to tell the audience, just like you do, everything I know. So when I found out from the agent that he was staying, that's a really good source. That's the guy that represents him. And you report that. Here's what he's expected to do. But there was a week left in the process. And sometime between then and now, obviously Trevor changed his mind and he put something out on Instagram. So at the end of the day, this is where it sits. It's not a great position for Georgia. I think Trevor Etienne's a pivotal player that could have done some great things next season. And I don't know, are we at the 12 o'clock hour yet? I don't know if there's a Hail Mary to get the guy back or what's happening, but I know that the kid had a lot on his mind, wanting to graduate from college, wanting to win a national title. But now the logic is he's already played 3 seasons and he's healthy now. You play another year. Who knows about your health? I don't know, BA. I'd hate to think he looked at the offensive line and had any concerns. But it is what it is. And so here's where we sit with Trevor Etienne and Carson Beck right now.
So I think this is I think a lot of people, they want to try to make sense of some of this kind of stuff. So did Etienne tell Georgia he was coming back and then changed his mind? Or was he considering returning and then just decided not to? Because that would obviously be two very different outcomes.
Yeah. Well, if he was going to leave, I think that the Senior Bowl would have invited him down there along with the 5 other players, and they were told he was coming back to Georgia. So that was their understanding when they spoke to Georgia. So Georgia was obviously under that impression. Of course, I reported last week via the agent that Trevor had talked to Kirby last Tuesday about coming back. Things change. That's what there is to understand. I mean, the kid had told Georgia he was coming back. That was the impression that Georgia was under. That was the impression the Senior Bowl was under. That was the impression Nate Frazier was under. Trevor had told him that, obviously, and that's what Nate said on social media. And he had a change of heart. And I can't explain why. He does have a brother in the NFL. I don't think this is a financial move. I think this is more of a kid who's evaluating his career options, believing that his game fits the NFL right now, and wanting to leave with good health and 3 years behind him versus getting the degree and having another chance at a national championship and perhaps raising his draft stock when there's not as many running backs. You can take a look at the running back class this year. It's extremely deep. Next year would be more advantageous, but it's always a risk reward. And it's a difficult decision for these guys to weigh. And as of late, this is the decision. This is what he put out there. He did not go public with it last week. And, the agent was under the impression, Georgia may have been under the impression, Senior Bowl, he may have told Nate Frazier, but he didn't post it on his social media. So I guess that's the new standard now, is until a kid posts something publicly or until the deadline hits. You never really know. I mean, goodness, Carson Beck went pro and pulled himself out. And apparently, according to USA Today, Georgia made a play for him. And Alabama made a play for him. He ended up at Miami. So there's a lot more shuffling in the transaction with these guys. This is kind of a byproduct now of the free transfer rule, of the NIL negotiations, and the extended deadline that these kids have to decide whether or not they're going to go to the NFL or not.
One more thing on this topic. We have a new category of figure in college athletics we didn't used to have, at least, as official it is now. It's the idea of the agent. How much should we trust these guys, Mike? Because, we saw a report last week that one of the agents, it wasn't a report, this guy just admitted this out in the open, that some of these guys are taking 20% commissions from their clients, which is far larger than what the typical NFL agent would get, at least on a salary. An endorsement deal a little bit different, but on a salary, that's a far larger commission. They obviously, I would say, when it comes to the most, conspicuous, oh my gosh, the most outlandish claims, almost all that always traces back to an agent. So there's already maybe reason to be somewhat skeptical about some of this kind of stuff. How much should we trust these agents?
Well, they're not all created equally, and in this case, this agent also is friends with the family and represents the older brother. And it truly would have been in his best interest from the jump to get the money now, right? That's the guaranteed thing. And he wanted, Trevor to stay as well. In this case, but I've dealt with a lot of them, big ones, small ones, and they're all different. And you have to judge it on a case by case basis. To me, I think the agent's extremely credible. I think everything he told me was the truth, right down to the funeral that Trevor went to last weekend, right down to the day that he talked to Kirby. All the information was accurate. The component is the kid. And to your point now, I do think that agents can play a game. Like, for example, if he would have said a week ago, Trevor's going pro, but Trevor's not going to say it, I probably wouldn't have, because I would have said, are they trying to leverage Georgia for more money? Because I don't want to be used here, right? Nobody wants to be used, and the media does get used from time to time, coaches, players, whomever. That would have been a red flag, but it made sense. Why would an agent tell you he's coming back? He's not making any money by Trevor coming back, right? So you have to kind of, I think, evaluate every story and every source that you use, whether it's an agent or it's a former coach or a current coach or a recruiting connection. And you got to look in at what's in it for them, one. Two, what makes the most sense here. And I think in this case, it was pretty firm footing. Now, why Trevor decided all of a sudden that would be in his best interest to take that chance and maybe go as a second I don't think he'll be a third day guy. I don't think he'll go in the 4th round. But why do that instead of come back? I can't weigh that. I don't know. It could be as simple as, he gets up for a 5 a.m. run at Georgia and says, you know what, I don't need this anymore. Or it could be, he goes to a funeral and says, man, nothing's promised to you. I want to play in the NFL before I die. You don't know. All you can go on is the information that you have at hand. To your point with the agents, in the big picture, I think when these schools get these salary caps or the schools start negotiating, I think the hope is, and Brian Kelly talked a lot about that this year on the SEC teleconference, of trying to get some level of standardization for these negotiations. Because right now, coaches are pinned too. A kid can go to a coach and say, Coach, man, let's say Damon Wilson. Let's just use him as an example. He can say, hey, Coach Smart, Ohio State's offering me $1 million. I need you to match it. And Smart says, hey, look, we aren't, and then Ohio State, oh, no, actually, we're not going to pay you that, Damon Wilson. And Damon Wilson said, well, now here's Missouri with $650 over here. And Kirby's like, you know what, so you just don't know how many people are in their ears, how early they're in their ears, how much of it is an agent, how much of it is family, how much of it is kid, how much of it is coaching staff, how much of it is other recruits. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. All you can do is try to find the credible people and trust those people until a kid says otherwise. A week ago, Trevor was expected to stay. But between then and now, he's changed his mind. Apparently, he's put it out on social media. And Nate Frazier says, gosh, you told me you were coming back for another year. The teammates are probably just as confused and hurt as we are. But Kirby Smart and Georgia football moves on, right? It's another slot for someone else. Who knows? Maybe Kirby goes in the portal now and finds himself an experienced running back.
Yeah, it'll certainly be something to watch for and see. And along those lines, just to finish real quick here, I want to be respectful of your time, so we'll do this quick. The point we've made over the course of the last couple of days is with what appears to be a little bit of uncertainty about what Georgia's going to look like next season, especially in the offensive side of the ball. Georgia's still among the national championship favorites for 2025. That the way that I said this before you joined us, this is not a fragile program. They may not win the national championship next season, but Georgia's success doesn't hang on one guy, one decision, one data point. That Georgia, I believe, is just much bigger than any one decision, whether it be Etienne or Beck or frankly anybody else.
Well, no doubt. It's a kick in the gut. You don't want to lose great players. You don't want to lose good team leaders like Etienne, certainly. But to your point, Georgia is still a very successful program. It's going to be a tall order, right? I mean, my eyes right now turn to Gunnar Stockton. And I love Gunnar Stockton. I love everything this kid is made of. But he's not an elite thrower, not a first-round thrower, and he's not really an elite runner either. What he is kind of Jake Fromish to me. He's a great leader. I think he'll make good decisions. I think he'll put the ball where it needs to be, but I don't think he's going to win the game with his legs. And I don't necessarily think that he can elevate, and throw for 400 yards and develop into a first-round draft talent. Now, does that mean they can't win a national championship? Of course not. Stetson Bennett, struggled, to be all conference, but he was timely with his plays and made enough plays. The question, Brandon, is does Georgia have the supporting cast for this sort of quarterback? I think the defense is loaded. It's exciting to me. Christian Miller coming back. You jumped on that first. I think you were the first one on that at the Sugar Bowl when you interviewed him and asked him. That was a really big guy to get back. You got to get those bigs on the D-line. Kirby spends a lot of money on those defensive players. That's where Georgia sinks a lot of their recruiting budget. And all you got to do is take a look at them. Number one linebackers, number one edges, elite defensive backs that they get. KJ Bolden just recently named a freshman All-American. This is 9 years in a row now. Georgia's produced a first-team freshman All-American. Offensively is where we have the questions. If you have 18 offensive linemen on your roster, where's the premier left tackle? Where's the next Broderick Jones? You just lost probably the best interior offensive line in the nation. Where are the guys that step up? Is Micah ready? Is Bobo ready? Who are going to be the backs? We know Frazier gets it done. We know Cash is coming back as a complementary piece, but who's going to be that too? Is Branson's knee going to be ready? Where's Rod Robinson at in that? The guy wasn't at the game. Is he still going to stay with the program? All indications are that he are. Delp coming back. That's big. Lawson Lucky, great tight end play. But in the end, with this schedule, and now we're seeing this attrition and how it hits the SEC, does Georgia have a championship roster? And that's something that Kirby Smart has the means and the ability to develop players to get set up for us before next season. Yeah, right now looks tough, but it's Kirby Smart, it's Georgia, and it's still January. So there's a lot of time left between now and that Marshall game when Georgia's going to set a new SEC record for consecutive home wins. I feel confident predicting that one, BA. You're not going to call me out on that one, are you?
No, not at all. All right, Mike, we appreciate your time. Thanks for being here. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Mike in his conversation making reference to, I guess, a report that's coming out. Let me try to read some of the details of this. Report. Georgia wanted Carson Beck to return in the 2025 season after entering the transfer portal. Alabama was the second team to call. This is Matt Hayes putting this out. I'll be totally frank here. I find that I'm very skeptical of that claim, and I'm not going to get much more into details about any of that, but I have my reasons, but I'm just going to kind of leave it at that because I don't want to speculate out loud, but I'm pretty skeptical of all of that, so color me unconvinced on the basis of what's out there on that. Either way, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously, exciting things in store. And by the way, we may have a cool announcement to make coming up as it involves our DawgNation cruise. I'm interested in that and telling you more about that here coming up very soon. That's going to be an incredible experience. Utopia the Sea is going to be gorgeous in April. Can't wait to have all of you there for it. You can give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She's a terrific travel agent. Especially selected for us by Royal Caribbean because she knows the Royal Caribbean brand. And I love this for Royal Caribbean. You know, it doesn't cost you anything to work with Jessica. It costs them something, but they want to spend that money because they want you to have a great experience. And when it comes to, like, you know, putting the DawgNation cruise aside, but any Royal Caribbean cruise vacation about which port you sail out of, which ship you sail on, which destinations you want to visit, you know, there's a lot of variables. Jessica knows all of them well. She can help you. It'll be a better experience working with her than if you try to do this on your own. And Royal Caribbean knows that. That's why they encourage you to use a great travel agent like Jessica to book your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations here in 2025. You can find her via email, jslater@dreamvacations.com, by the way. So that is going to be great stuff. I can't wait to see you for our DawgNation cruise coming up in April, or hearing about your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation you take at some point in time here this year. Let's do a couple of things quick, and then we'll bring on Davin Bellamy. Don't want to keep him waiting. It was a huge night last night for SEC basketball, and every time the league kind of gets it going here this year, you get these remarkable results. First of all, Auburn at home makes it look easy against a ranked Mississippi State team. Keep that in mind. That's the team, even with the Broom injury, coming in on Saturday for Georgia. It doesn't get any easier even after tonight's trip to Tennessee. As Mike mentioned, Ole Miss, the team we saw Georgia play in Oxford a couple of weeks ago, they go into Coleman Coliseum last night and beat Alabama. So Ole Miss right now among the best in the SEC, and a highly ranked Alabama team going down at home there. Kentucky taking down Texas A&M. So as I told you before, Kentucky was 100 points against Florida, 106, I think it was, 95 against Mississippi State. Then they're 81-69 winners against 11th-ranked Texas A&M. But in Athens last week, that was not the case. This is just a really, really good SEC. And by the way, at the bottom of the league, interesting story here, and we'll get back to football after this. How about the fact that John Calipari, high-profile first-year coach at Arkansas, a lot of fanfare leaving Kentucky to come to Arkansas. Arkansas that spent, I guess millions in NIL, and they are 0-4 in the SEC. Lost last night at Maravich Center to the other winless SEC team, LSU. And Arkansas is now winless in the SEC at 0-4. And shame to see those lousy, stinking Gators, 5th-ranked Florida, going down to Missouri last night, too. This is a great league right now. So much fun is SEC basketball. A little bit less fun, but something we must mention, Damon Wilson, the Georgia edge rusher in the transfer portal. We kind of knew it was down to Ohio State or Missouri for his services. We'd heard chatter coming out of Columbus the last few days that Ohio State did not think it was going to be them, and now we find out it is Missouri. There's all kinds of sort of stuff out there about what might have gone on here. And, I mean, it's been clear that he wasn't coming back to Georgia for quite some time. But would it be Ohio State? Would it be Missouri? There is no shortage of, as I like to call it, online chatter about why it was Missouri instead of Ohio State. Pretty fascinating, I guess, glimpse in the world we live in here right now. But this is also the sort of thing that Missouri has done before. They have a tendency to want to spin big on a small number of kind of big-time prospects. And for the most part, that's sort of working. It's kind of like, if you ever play like Daily Fantasy or something like that, the sort of stars and scrubs theory, they've kind of subscribed to that. Not to say that their other players are scrubs, but you know what I'm talking about. It's just kind of the sort of theory that's out there that you spin big on a small number of guys and sort of put whoever you can find around them. And for Missouri, for the most part, that's kind of worked. We'll see if it works for Damon Wilson here. But a pretty big ad for the Missouri Tigers as Wilson is on his way there. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I was going to do another story, but we'll save that for later on. We've done that a lot here as of late. For now, though, let's get ready to welcome in our guest here today. Great stuff from Davin Bellamy. And Davin, since I was just mentioning the Damon Wilson thing, let me pick up right there with you here. This is a guy who sort of, by perception anyway, leaves the bigger program to go to what is going to be kind of viewed as a lesser program. We would assume he gets more money for doing so, and it's not like Missouri's a losing team. They haven't been. They were very good in 2023. They were at least decent in 2024, but this is the sort of modern decision where sometimes in a lesser team, you have, or at least what's perceived to be a lesser team, you have a chance to make more money from where you sit. Is that a reasonable decision for someone like Wilson to make?
Yeah, what's going on, Brandon? I mean, times have just changed, because I remember, it was, Lorenzo Carter, Leonard Floyd, Jordan Jenkins, and myself all in one room. And we just kind of waited our chance. But if we had NIL, opportunities and people blowing up our phone, saying that we can come there and be starters with some money, then, things may have been different. So it's just the atmosphere that these guys are playing in. And I think that this is just Georgia just kind of having, too many riches at one position. I mean, you got Damon Wilson, who was a top, edge guy. And when it comes to his performance, even though he's not getting a lot of snaps, he had the best winning percentage when it came to pass rushing. And he wasn't seeing the field like he wanted to. Somebody else comes in, tell him he can come be a starter. And I think another thing that we need to look into, not just saying that this is the main reason, but, a lot of guys just like playing the traditional edge spot. And when you go to Georgia, such a team defense and such a multiple defense that sometimes you may not be on the edge. You may be in a position that you may not want to play. And it kind of reminded me of Jermaine Johnson when he left to go to Florida State. He just kind of wanted to be a guy that can go play on the 4-3, line up on the edge, and just go. So I think it's a little bit of all of that kind of, matched his decision.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And I've said before, when the NIL era first started, the kind of the adage that a lot of teams like Georgia were using is, hey, you got to remember, NFL is more valuable than NIL. And it seems like that was likely to be true. But, Davin, I got to be honest with you. And some of these dollar figures you hear thrown around for some of these guys, not even like the highest, even like some of like the sort of mid-level stuff, I got to be honest, if it was my son or if it was me and you're offering me X number of dollars here right now, even if the development's perhaps not quite as good, if the money's good enough, then it almost doesn't matter. I mean, there are figures being thrown around right now that almost make you say, well, listen, if this reduces my, value to the NFL later on, I'm getting paid right now. So what's the difference? I mean, we're almost getting to the point where some of these figures, at least, some of the believable ones are substantial enough where maybe you do sacrifice a little bit of development. Maybe you sacrifice the chance to win a championship because so-and-so is willing to pay me some huge figure.
Right. I mean, look, man, like, you can take it from me, man. Your NFL career, making millions, being a household name, even off of what you did in college, that may not, happen. There's so many factors that can happen no matter how good a player was in college, no matter how many plays he made. Cashing in on the back end on your career sometimes isn't always what happens. So you got a guy right now who, okay, I'm a third round guy. And if I'm not in the first 15 or the first round, well, the first 15 picks are substantially more money than the last 15. And then you start talking about the first 2 rounds and you compare those to day 2 and 3 guys. I mean, if I could stay in school and live a kid life on campus and still get 3 meals a day, fed to me and still make a NFL rookie salary. And also that'll help me transition into life. And, I can maybe invest my senior year instead of not making anything in college, going somewhere as a 3rd, 4th round draft pick, getting an opportunity in camp, twisting an ankle, being on the practice squad, and now your career just stays like this. So, I look at the Carson Beck number, man. Carson Beck is going to be making more money than, a lot of rookie, quarterbacks. I mean, so why leave? Why leave? The expectation that you have in the NFL versus even though you're in college and you're being treated like a pro, you're getting paid like a pro, college is still college. And it's a big difference between that and the NFL and the pressures that come with it. But if I can get the NFL money and don't have the NFL pressure and anxieties that come with that side, then, you can sign me up for it.
No, I think that's right. You mentioned Beck. What do you make of, since we've last spoken, we now know that Beck is obviously not going to the NFL. He's going to stay in college, and he's going to go to Miami. Huge dollar figure that has been reported on the record. You've heard one outlet say $3 million, one outlet say $4 million, but nobody disputes it's, sort of 7-figure type number here. What do you make of Beck being a Hurricane and the sort of, I guess, mixed response this has gotten from Georgia fans seeing him move on?
Well, with all these guys making this money, I think you start to see the coaches start to use this more as a professional grading scale. You got half the people that say, Beck should have came back, and then you got half the people that said, okay, look, we're going to give you this money to come back, which means it's going to take away from us giving this money to somewhere else. You're getting up there at age, you're coming off of a UCL, surgery. We have a younger guy behind you. We have a team that we may want to mold that younger quarterback with than a 6-year guy. So now you're starting to see kind of more of the NFL way of thinking coming into, college sports with Beck being so old. Well, what does he do? He finds where, his product and his brand can continue to grow because in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think Georgia was ready for Gunnar Stockton, for it to be his show. We're not going to give you the money for a 6-year quarterback after we've seen how you've already peaked. And that's where I think, you got some guys saying, we want him back. Some guys saying we don't want him back. I think he read the room well. And in my opinion, I think Georgia was just ready to move on and groom another team with a younger quarterback and let him go on and make his money. He's coming off an injury. His draft stock is dropped to maybe a, 3rd round guy. And he can make that being in Miami for another year with hopes of rising his draft stock. So I don't really put, too much on the kid. I just think, you're at a 6-year and it's time to move on. It's just time to move on.
I think that's probably right. You kind of referenced this a little bit earlier. We're in that kind of time of year where a lot of Georgia players are making the decision, do you go to the NFL draft? Do you stay here at Georgia? And listen, I'm a selfish person. I try not to be, but you can't help but sort of see things through what would benefit me the most, which is guys coming back. For obviously a lot of players, their own self-interest is probably benefited by the decision to go to the NFL. Yet we all have fond memories of back in 2017 when you and your guy on the side of the ball, Lorenzo Carter, when obviously Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, when y'all all made that decision to come back to Georgia for 2017, it ended up being really the catalyst that kind of propelled, at the time, almost like unprecedented success for Georgia. First time in the college football playoff, SEC championship, first time in a while, eyelash away from winning the national championship. What was that moment like for you, and how much were y'all talking to each other? How many people did you have in your ear saying, do this, do that? Like how much, what was the kind of the behind the scenes part of all of that way back then?
You know, man, me and Sony had the same comm class. Me and Lorenzo Carter basically lived together. And, just the tone changed a lot. Me and Zoe would be chilling at the crib, and Zoe was done, and Zoe wanted to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wanted to stay. And then things switched to where, I wanted to leave, and Zoe wanted to stay. And then I thought for sure that Sony Michelle was leaving in the back of, comm class. I just asked him, we wasn't paying attention. I just kind of leaned over and said, bro, are you coming back in the back of class? And,
Mm-hmm.
he was kind of just stuck on coming back.
Yeah.
So, and also, man, Coach Jennings, he just kind of explained to us, how do you want to be remembered? I think that year was 8-5 or,
Yep.
or
Yep.
kind of or something like that.
Yep.
And he was like, this senior class, if you guys walk out of that door at 8-5, no one will remember you. No matter what you do, no one will remember you. Do you want the money, or the legacy? Now, I must say, we didn't have people calling our phone, asking us, for $2 million to go here. so I mean, look, so we weren't getting those phone calls, but I just think our legacy, man, and that team was just full of winners, man. You got Nick Chubb, Quan Smith, Sonny Michelle, Isaiah Wynn. Those guys want to be remembered off winning, knowing that, we had done enough to where we would at least get opportunity, in the NFL, but we wanted to win. So just a different, just different type style of kids nowadays, man.
Well, I tell you, and look, you wish everybody be this way, and it's not always easy for everybody to want to do this, but the idea of thinking about your legacy, and that doesn't mean that every single player's got to always do exactly what I want them to do. I really am not trying to, control anybody's behavior, but if I could wish anything on these, players who are far younger than I am, I would wish for them a little bit of insight, as Jonas Jennings once gave to y'all, which is, hey, one of these days, you are going to want to be remembered fondly. You are going to want to get a chance to celebrate good moments. And gosh, who would have ever known it would have turned out to be as good as that final season was? But Davin, what if you didn't have that in your life? What if you didn't have win at Notre Dame? What if you didn't have Rose Bowl? I'm not saying you wouldn't be a great guy and you wouldn't have a fulfilling, life. It's not what I'm saying. It wouldn't be as fun. I mean, it just wouldn't be. The stories you tell, the memories you have, it would not be as good if you didn't have that year. And you do sort of wish that sort of insight into, man, there's a chance to craft a legacy here. You wish the value of that word could be in the mind of every young player, no matter what decision they make, because honestly, as you get to be a little older, legacies start to matter, don't they?
Yeah, it does. It does, man. And I wish you could give guys some glasses to look into the future, because, your NFL career won't go as planned.
Yeah.
Certain guys will, and for certain guys it won't. And even when it comes to the guys that do well at the next level, in the NFL, you're still remembered off of what you did in college.
Yep.
Unless you're Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes and you're going and winning 6 rings where New England is building statues of you, if you're just a guy that's, just doing your job, well, when you retire, your college is going to, call you back to sign, memorabilia.
Yep.
Not the NFL team that you was on doing special teams. So, but kind of in defense to these guys, come on, Brandon, you know how hard it'll be, man. You thinking about, staying at Georgia, and then you got a school saying, hey, I got $2 million.
I get it.
These guys now, one, they can't see into the future. There's just so many distractions going to them. But if you do what you're supposed to do at the University of Georgia and you win, because, kind of like you said, man, the Notre Dame game and the Rose Bowl and come back another year and going to the national championship, that has increased my brand so much. And that's because we thought about longevity rather than right now, so, but it's just a different game plan. But I'm definitely blessed, to come back that another year and just to have all the support that I have for Dawg fans. You just wish guys could just put on glasses and see the future a little bit.
I love it, Davin. Great stuff. I appreciate your insight. I think you have a lot of valuable perspective on a lot of these topics here, and I certainly appreciate all of that. We'll look forward to having this conversation again, and hope you have a great week.
Same way, Brandon. Always, man. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Great stuff there from Davin Bellamy. And I think it's really interesting to hear someone like that say, hey, how valuable, the idea of legacy has become to him personally. And the other thing that Davin mentions there, we'll get ready to wrap up here in a minute, but the other thing that Davin mentions there is, and I don't know why this is, I have some sense of why this is, but it's just true. It's like the NFL don't care about any of this stuff. The idea that you're going to be, whatever the version of DGD is, there is no version of that in the NFL, at least for the most part. It's a pretty cold, calculated relationship, very transactional, that program has with player, that organization has with player. Well, down here at our level, we're just different than that. And I hope that never changes. I hope that there's always going to be autograph signings at the UGA bookstore or interview appearances on DawgNation Daily or whatever. I hope we always have the kind of reverence for former players that, the college world and, Georgia football is sort of famous for, because it does make our brand of football different. It really does. And, kind of the sort of widespread, large-scale professionalization of all of this, in some respects, may be kind of unavoidable. In the Rick Barnes clip we played a little earlier, there may be more of that on the way. But, man, I hope it never quite gets to be just that, because if it does, we've lost something. And, by the way, how about the fact that, and this is about old school, just a few years ago now, but old school, the idea that the whole, are we coming back, are we staying, that some of this was sort of hatched out with Sony Michel and Davin Bellamy sitting in the back of their class, kind of talking in class. Are they passing notes? These days, are these guys hardly even students anymore? You kind of wonder sometimes. But back then, the decision to return for a senior year, what turned out to be a glory year for Georgia, a lot of that kind of, the ruminations of that began with Sony and Davin kind of whispering in the back of class while the teacher was up there lecturing. There's something very, very quaint and really enjoyable about that. Really good stuff from Davin Bellamy here today. Now, speaking of good stuff, if you want, I use that segue probably way too much, but if you want the best of all of DawgNation delivered right there to your email inbox, a great way to do that with our brand new Hunker Download DawgNation newsletter. We've had a newsletter for a long time, but we've never quite had a newsletter like this. People seem to be really enjoying it. I've gotten great feedback about it. I think you'll like it too. And you can go to DawgNation.com/newsletter to sign up for that. I think you'll be really happy. I'm a part of this. I write a few words there each and every day. Our buddy Jack Leo does a great job of kind of, I think the word here is curating. He's curating the best of DawgNation's content to be delivered right there to you. No doubt if Georgia goes on the road and pulls an upset as, 11, 12-point underdogs tonight against Tennessee, that will be prominently featured in tomorrow's Hunker Download newsletter. So go to DawgNation.com/newsletter for more on that. By the way, speaking of the big game here tonight, if you're getting ready to settle in and enjoy it, may I suggest a little beverage to accompany you on that? How about some Finnish long drink? Delicious, of course, as always. Whether it's the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, the cranberry, which is my wife's favorite even to this day. My favorite, though, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor. It's called the traditional citrus. Easy for me to say, the traditional citrus. Really, really enjoyable. Grapefruit flavored gin kick. There's also the peach flavored version. Folks love that. The long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. I know some of y'all love that. So you can go to thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code, find some, pick it up, have it tonight. Make yourself a little pregame tailgate party before Georgia basketball, and then celebrate the victory when it comes with some Finnish long drink. I personally think that is a great idea. All right, so as we bounce out of here today, speaking of Georgia basketball tonight at Thompson Bowling Arena, how about a little golden shoe that shouts them out? I love the Georgia basketball account on X saying it's a business trip. No doubt Georgia going there to take care of business. And let me tell you this. If Georgia wins a third straight game against a ranked opponent, in this case, kind of a top 5 type team on the road, it is on. I mean, you talk about completely changing the conversation. Everything will be different. As it stands, it is still a Georgia team right in the middle of a very, very rough and tumble SEC. But, boy, you're talking about a completely different scenario here if Georgia gets that win tonight on the SEC network. So best of luck to the Dogs on the road up there for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. They lost last night to Missouri. We love that. But what we love even more is the fact that it's been 1,530 days since they've beaten Georgia in football. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on that. Okay, so let us get some comments here. We'll start on YouTube just because I happen to have that open. Anthony Edwards, I don't believe that's the Ant-Man, but Anthony Edwards nonetheless says that he loves Davin Bellamy. I really enjoyed Davin, too. Great story from him there about what went down in 2017 and kind of all that stuff. And, I don't mind telling you, I'm a sucker for stuff like that. Y'all know I'm kind of corny and sentimental, and, that stuff really works on me. It really does. So I like going back and hearing those stories, and I enjoy that. Jonathan Aaron says, I think that Beck went to Miami for a few reasons. The money, his girlfriend, the ACC is trash. Will put up big passing numbers to get drafted first. Yeah, I'll work in descending order on that. Starting with your last point first. We'll see if the draft fortunes change. We'll see if they do. At a certain point, you kind of reach your draft ceiling, even with better numbers. That doesn't necessarily change your draft prognosis, but we'll see. As far as the girlfriend goes, of all the stuff with the back, that's the thing I just sort of find the least interesting. If you'll notice, there's been a big thing this week about, y'all know who Sydney Thomas, is that her name? If you'll notice, we hadn't touched that with a 10-foot pole, even though the Lane Kiffin tweet about it was actually pretty funny.
Yes, we're aware of her.
Yeah. So Cody Chaffins has confirmed it is Sydney Thomas, and he is aware of her. And I actually think that's kind of funny. But we're not doing Sydney Thomas content around here, and we're not doing, what was it, Cavender? We're not doing Cavender content. I'm just not interested in that. Clearly Carson's all in that TikTok world. That is just not the world in which I want to live in. And I'm sure no one's shedding tears over me not out there doing TikTok dances and things like that. But even when it's kind of funny, like the Sydney Thomas thing is, we're just not going to swing at every pitch. We are not going to swing at every pitch. And the Cavender stuff is sort of the same way. That, listen, maybe, I don't know. Part of me wants to say, let me just not say anything. Let me just not. But clearly the money is a huge deal here. And when you look at the Cam Ward thing last year, we have reason to believe that it was sort of Miami or nothing for Cam Ward. And Ward had a much better year in 2023 than Beck had in 2024. But the market for Ward theoretically would have been far higher than the market would have been for Beck, even though we're led to believe that Beck is getting more money. Ward was a tremendous quarterback for Washington State in 2023. But when it came to being by far and away the biggest name in the transfer portal, Ohio State seemingly never really got involved. Auburn never really got involved. These teams that you might would have said, boy, they're desperate for quarterback. They've got money. They'll pony up big. They just sort of didn't. That Ward seemed to be playing NFL draft for leverage with, unless Miami gives me what I want, and eventually he sort of got what it was he wanted from Miami. That's just sort of my perception of all of that, that the only school that either had the money or was willing to make the big dollar offer to Ward was probably Miami. And when it comes to the Carson Beck thing here right now, it sort of seems like the same thing is true, is that there's kind of one school out there that's willing to spend the really biggest dollars on quarterback. It seems like it's probably Miami, because the other sort of on the record stated, schools of interest here, Texas Tech sort of denied it. Ohio State's still playing. They did pretty well with a far cheaper option here this year. And I told you before, whatever what's-his-face is reporting, I'm pretty skeptical of all of that. Let us see what else. DMart42 on the subject of Beck in the Georgia locker room. I don't know that anybody will ever. There's sort of the idea in media sometimes of now it can be told, and you see this in professional sports a lot, especially for whatever reason the NFL, that once a coach gets fired, all of a sudden there's all this on-the-record reporting of how bad things were, and there was this, there was that. It's kind of the now it can be told phenomenon. I don't know. We don't get a ton of now it can be told around college football, that a lot of that stuff sort of stays secret forever. So what may or may not have gone on, I don't know that we'll ever get a ton of on-the-record reporting about. Let me give you an example where that did happen. The stuff involving Jeremy Pruitt at Georgia eventually got very, very specifically reported on the record. That's the kind of thing that would have only lived in like sort of a message board rumor mill land, got reported specifically in detail on the record. So sometimes you do get the now it can be told story, but for the most part in college football, you never really get that. The closest you get is the sort of online whispers of, did you hear about this or did you hear about that? And, we're always forced to say, well, do we think this is probably true or not? And frankly, some of the things that people say to me via text message, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting, but is that true or not? I don't really know. So, you're always, in some cases, kind of wondering, well, this story certainly matches what I think might be true. And coming out right now, it sort of validates maybe what I hope would be true, just based on, I don't know. It seems like, this confirms my priors of who the good guys are and the bad guys are. But do we ever get a lot of on-the-record confirmation? Typically in college football, the answer to that question is no. But it's a really fair question. And, I mean, we used the word tension on Friday's show. You don't have to look very far to find somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that's willing to describe some tension during the season. Now, how bad was it? I don't know. And, look, I have friends. You have friends. I have, even sometimes people that you work with. It's like, okay, well, you may have tension one week, but by the next month, you've sort of moved on. You're doing something else, right? It's like, so some of that kind of stuff could have been within the moment. And, there's frustrations right now, but eventually, people just sort of move on. There's also a chance that some of that was maybe true too. Brodo Baggins says, besides Frazier, what other running backs are you excited to see get some more snaps in 2025? I would say I don't really know. You'd love Branson Robinson to be healthy, but it seems like that's probably going to be a pretty significant recovery. Roderick Robinson, I don't know what the future holds for him. I don't really know what Chauncey Bowens, I don't really know what he is yet. Obviously, you think he has a chance to be pretty good. Dwight Phillips is a very interesting player, but I would say more so as something other right now than just a traditional running back. It certainly seems like to me for right now, Georgia is set up to give a lot of carries to Nate Frazier in a way that one lone running back has not always gotten at UGA. It just seems like that Frazier's set up for a lot of carries. Now, Cash Jones coming back, I think, is nice for Georgia. I mean, there were times last year, y'all, where, Jones was getting behind the defense on passing plays better than anybody. And that probably should not be the case. But there were times when, he was as trusted a receiver as Georgia probably had. So I'll admit that other than Frazier, who I do think, the freshman stat line suggests he could have good things in store. Other than that, I don't really know what Georgia has at the running back position right now. But we could see a lot of Nate Frazier. MG says he sees Nate as like a Zeus or a Cook. With all due respect to those players, I think that Frazier fits the profile of someone who could be far more prolific in a Georgia uniform. I do. I think the overall statistical profile for Frazier might end up being a better comp for a Sony or a Swift than for a Cook or a Zeus. Once again, not to say that those players weren't good players, but I think that Frazier has a chance to be far more prolific than any Georgia running back since DeAndre Swift. I do. What else? Let us see.
Missed opportunity. Hey, Brandon, it's Cody.
Hey, Cody.
Missed opportunity to ask Davin Bellamy if he was going to join Ed Reed as a coach at Davin and my alma mater, Chamblee High School.
That's exactly right. I should have actually asked about that because he is a is it Chamblee Bulldog? The Bulldogs?
Yeah, we're the Chamblee Bulldogs. So you got Ed Reed on that staff now. Jamal Lewis, is also on the staff. Both of them have kids at Chamblee now, but Davin and I both played there. So there you go.
Well, there you go. That actually is a pretty cool tie. And obviously Ed Reed was, I think, trying to get some college jobs. That didn't quite work out for him. But, Cody, I love the fact that so many of these coaches now, aspiring coaches, and Deion Sanders kind of did this too, the former player who wants to be a coach. Patrick Ewing once did this in basketball too. It's like you sort of start wherever and you're willing to work your way up. It seems like Ed Reed willing to do that there at Chamblee. Obviously, as you say, kind of has some ties to the program, but also just kind of wanting to demonstrate to people, even though I'm one of the all-time great defensive backs, safeties in the history of the NFL, I want to be a coach, and here's how serious I am. I'm sort of willing to start anywhere to make it happen.
Yeah, and he doesn't need the money, right?
No,
so he can start anywhere, just get that experience and impact kids' lives. It's good. It's going to be fun. We'll see if my Bulldogs can. They've had some fairly good seasons, but we'll see if they can take it to the next level.
Yeah, I guess Roddy Jones was a Chamblee Bulldog. Is that right? Yeah. So
Roddy, Davin, and then me. It's probably the top 3 players ever. I would say
that's the Mount Rushmore of Chamblee football. I like that. That's a really good question. Who is that defensive coordinator now? Do we know that?
I know Coach Swank, who is the head coach there. Really good dude. And I don't know who the defensive coordinator is.
Yeah, it's a sort of a Hall of Fame level coaching staff for sure, and a lot of former Ravens kind of in the mix there on that too. That's pretty good stuff. Let us see what else. Yard Dog says, I think BA should have a page 6 segment on every show, kind of like around the SEC, but especially during the off season. Yeah, listen, I don't fault anybody for sort of whatever they want to do. It's like I like, for instance, like some of the Barstool guys. I think some of those guys are pretty entertaining, but it's also fairly obvious that I am not going to be kind of a Barstool guy. Like I'm not against however people want to, make their living. I'm not against whatever kind of content people want to pursue. But I'm really not. I'm not I don't turn my nose up at a lot of stuff. And some of the Barstool guys I think are pretty funny. But the sort of Barstoolization of content, I'm just not really a part of that. That's just not my thing. I think what it is I have young kids. They're less younger every year, but I have young kids. So I've always sort of wanted to do family-friendly content because of the fact that I have a family. I was probably not as interested in family-friendly content before I had a family, but once you have a family, you realize how valuable that is, and you realize how much you want other, the people out there, and I won't get too specific about this, but the people out there that I feel like are putting out good family-friendly content for my kids as opposed to some of the other stuff that exists, I'm so grateful for that, man. It's like I would give them every dollar I could. You're really great. When you have a family, you are really grateful for people who, do good content that's sort of, appropriate for families. And so I think that probably just sort of colors my my viewpoint on things where there's a lot. Trust me, if I put Sidney Thomas on a YouTube thumbnail and we did some sort of thing about whatever, I promise you, there's a lot more clicks to be had leaning into Cavender this or Sidney Thomas that. And, as I said before, the thing where Lane Kiffin, if you don't know the story, you don't have no idea what I'm talking about. But some of that stuff actually is pretty funny. But that's just not my lane. No pun intended. I just want to stay in my lane. I'm sort of happy to give the whatever, content to somebody else and try to serve the kind of people who are more likely to gravitate towards me anyway. Randy Hall, complimentary of the outfit today. I appreciate that. I've told you before, I don't always love to wear white on the show, especially during the wintertime because I look like Casper the Ghost, but nonetheless, I appreciate that. Let us see what else. Garrison Tucker says, is there more of a focus this offseason for Bobo on the offensive line or Schumann with the defensive line? Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem between the two is probably the offensive line. And I would say there is just less certainty about how you replace some of that. So offensive line, I do think is a legitimate concern for Georgia right now. Scott Boland says he often listens to the podcast while he drives his children to and from practices, scouts, et cetera. He says, I appreciate the family-friendly nature of the show. Well, I really appreciate that, Scott. That's really what I keep in mind. I do. And I know that kind of makes me sort of sometimes like corny or whatever. Like I'm not cool at all. But I'm also sort of comfortable not being cool at this stage of my life. So, Scott, I really appreciate that. That's really nice to hear. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment. See how they're doing. Then we'll get kind of ready to wrap up here in a little bit. Let us see what else on the Facebook side of things. Jacob O'Neill, by the way, says, if we do at any point in time start doing more like Sidney Thomas-themed content, he said he'd be the first one to click on it. So there you go. Maybe we'll do like sort of a what do you call it, like a dark web version of DawgNation, where if you want to get like speculation on SEC coaches sliding into Sidney Thomas's DMs or the latest in the Cavender saga or the whatever else, we'll do thirst traps all over the place for you on that, but not so with me. Not so with me on this show. All right, let's see what else. Oh, okay. There you go. See, I do know phrases. Jay was saying he was laughing at me saying thirst trap. I do know phrases even if I choose not to use them. You can't. I mean, I don't know. By the way, speaking of Jeremy Pruitt, who we referenced earlier, Matt Rugaviner letting us know that Pruitt's currently the junior high boys basketball coach at Plainview High School in Alabama. Now, we said this yesterday, like there's a lot about Pruitt that I found pretty distasteful given his time here at Georgia. I do think he got a raw deal from Tennessee. I mean, I do. It's like he got the book thrown at him on top of all books for essentially doing what kind of everybody does. Like something about that seemed, I don't know, I end up sometimes defending like the worst people in the world. But that was one of those things where like I sort of felt the need of like, are we really sure we want to like, sort of render Pruitt unhireable? Tennille Calvino says, I'm pretty tan for the winter. I don't look like ass. That's nice to know. I've said this before. I'm a vain person, try not to be, but my ultimate goal in life is to be tan during the winter. That if I can be tan during the winter, I feel like somehow, some way, life is working out for me the way I want it to. That is an embarrassing thing to believe, but it unfortunately is true. Matt Pritchett says, do you see any coaches leaving UGA? Well, and I'm not trying to be flippant. I'm trying to give you my most honest answer. That you talk about 10 on-field coaches, sort of the law of large numbers would suggest that almost anything is a possibility. And as Connor Riley, I think, did a good job of mentioning yesterday, if it does happen, it typically happens kind of in February. And it's not always, it's like Georgia has earned the right, to not have to like go through some sort of like self-immolation process of, we did not think our standard was met, so we are therefore firing so-and-so. We're not doing, Georgia just doesn't have to do that. Or have you noticed now that the new phrase, and you see this in both college and the NFL, where it's like the PR people, the headline is, there's a change in leadership. That's the new phrase that gets used. I don't even know that Georgia, because of the success that it's enjoyed, even has to do the change in leadership. I don't think it has to do that. We may hear that so-and-so wants to spend more time with his family or whatever. I mean, a couple of years ago, we heard that Matt Luke was retiring. That retirement didn't last as long as Tyson Fury's. That's just kind of one of those deals. So there is a very good chance that Georgia could lose a coach, and maybe that's for performance-related reasons, but it's also kind of maybe not. And like a lot of things with Georgia, it's one of those things where like we may never get for sure confirmation on anything. I mean, it's like, you've got like a couple years ago when Lanning got hired as defensive coordinator and I guess Coley got hired as offensive coordinator, they went for months without even announcing it. And I think they tried to just see if they could not announce it, but eventually they just sort of had to. And then you've got remember Jamal Adai? Like he was here for a year and then he was gone. You never really, heard much about that, but you sort of had your speculation, about some of that kind of stuff. It's just, Georgia's not in the business of releasing a lot of information about who comes and who goes and why it is that they are, but I'm sure we'll have our thoughts as to why. Juan Alvarez asking about the possibility that Georgia might bring in a transfer quarterback. I do believe they will try to, but I also believe that quarterback is a little bit more in line with like the guy from Charlotte that wants to not go to Florida anymore, Deshaun Purdy, or Dylan Lonergan, who is from Brookwood, went to Alabama, now at Boston College. To me, those are the kinds of quarterbacks that Georgia is likely to go after. Not is it Fernando Mendoza, the Cal quarterback that's down in Indiana? Not the guy that would be expecting to start at his new job. I really do believe that Georgia, wants to give Gunnar Stockton every chance to really earn this starting quarterback job. Not to say there won't be some competition, but Stockton has played 6 quarters now against teams in the college football playoff semifinal, and looked pretty good in all 6 of those quarters. I think he will be treated as the starting quarterback, I believe, during spring practice and throughout the offseason. So I believe that Georgia wants quarterback depth, but it's like more of a replacement for what Jaden Rashada would have been this year as opposed to Gunnar Stockton, if that makes sense. Ken Holcomb says that white apparel will make your skin look darker. In real life, that may be true, but video is tricky. White has a tendency to sort of take over when it comes to the video part of all this. I joked about this yesterday with my sweatshirt. What looks good in the mirror, or what you think looks good in the mirror, and what actually kind of looks like on the TV monitor, oftentimes a very different thing. UGA Marine pointing out there aren't a lot of great quarterbacks in the portal. Really is true that for these teams that have thought that there was going to be this easy button you could push when it comes to transfer portal quarterbacks, that doesn't really exist. At least not in law. You got the example of like a Cam Ward, and I guess, you're going to say, the Duke quarterback now at Riley Leonard at Notre Dame. You have some examples of this, but it's not, most teams have a transfer quarterback, but there aren't very many programs that have had their fortunes changed because of a transfer quarterback, if you kind of get my drift. Let me go to YouTube and we'll get ready to go. MG sharing some love for Josh Jackson. Yeah, I would expect that Jackson makes a move this year. I think he has a really bright future in football based on everybody that I've talked to. It's still pretty early, I would say, in his lifespan as a football player for that breakout to occur in 2025, but who knows? It might. It might. Let us see what else. Y'all be kind to each other on YouTube. Listen, I do get there's going to be some, throwing elbows and things like that. And for the most part, if you go to the YouTube comment section, you're sort of okay with that. I do realize that, but still, be kind to each other. Atlanta Boy 88 says, I like Gunnar, but my question is, can he be that playmaking game changer when the team needs him the most? It is a really good question. And, I think you saw some evidence of that in the games that he did play, willingness to run against Texas, pretty good throws for the most part against Notre Dame. He didn't seem overwhelmed by that moment. So, the question that you ask is legitimate enough that I don't want to disrespect you by giving you kind of a flippant answer. So we will all watch that unfold this year and we'll find out. But I do like the early returns. I do. I do kind of like him. And I do put something into the fact that his teammates seem to really believe in him too. I do put something into that. Brodo Baggins says YouTube is a gauntlet. much like Georgia's 2025 schedule, which is very funny. Carlos Folsom says Ewers to the NFL. Is that breaking right now? Boy, what a weird, football career Quinn Ewers has had. Interesting is maybe a better word for it than that. So there you go. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. I found out, there's reporting out there right now that this weekend, heading into the, first of next week, you have that cold weather coming back in again. I'm sort of done with that now, but apparently it is possibly. Well, that's another reminder to you to get that heating system tuned up from our friends at RS Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised. They'll get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. That's always a great thing. So find them online today, rsandrews.com. Looking forward to what I believe will be Terrence Edwards on the show tomorrow. I hope it is anyway. Terrence was just out in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. Spend some time around Talon Taylor. I'm really, really hoping to talk to him more about that tomorrow. So tune in for that. We'll see you then. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.